Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. In today's conversation, we're delving into something increasingly central to the future of our field: how we actually measure safety culture, well-being, leadership, and organizational performance in a way that's reliable, scalable, and genuinely useful. I'm joined by Mark Wright, founder of FIFO Consulting and creator of the Health and Safety Index, a diagnostic tool used across Australia, the UK, Europe, and North America. We explore why simply asking, "How safe are we?" isn't enough anymore, and why traditional safety surveys often miss the crucial context about leadership behaviours, mental health, engagement, and the pressures facing different parts of the workforce. We get into the insights the index is revealing across thousands of workers, the gap between senior perception and frontline reality, the challenges faced by shift workers, the different dynamics that shape contractor behaviour, and the emerging trend that well-being and psychological safety are becoming defining business risks. What I find especially compelling in this discussion is that it's not merely data for the sake of data. It's about clarity. What's working, where the pressure points sit, and which levers actually deliver meaningful improvement. It's an evidence-based view of culture and performance that moves beyond assumptions and gives leaders something concrete to act on. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Great, thanks Christian. Thanks for having us, and really look forward to having a chat.
Good stuff. So you've worked in lots of different settings. You've done consulting, corporates, regulatory work, and now you run what we're going to spend most of our time talking about today, a really robust diagnostic safety tool. So before we start talking about the index, what's the story behind how it came to exist?
Yeah, so look, I've founded a health and safety consulting business here in Australia, and I guess it came about through need, really. I mean, for those people who have been around the industry for a little while, and even today, the collective view on how to measure safety effectively continues to be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think there's one right answer, of course, but what became increasingly obvious to me, at least, is we couldn't see in the marketplace a really simple way to effectively get feedback from the workforce at scale.
Mm-hmm.
In an integrated way that was statistically reliable. So we set out on a bit of a journey to explore what the options were, really. I think it's been well documented for some time that strong, robust, high-performing safety cultures and climate surveys perhaps are a great way to be able to get a measure on how effective the organisation is performing. How you go about doing that, it's a completely different question.
Yeah. And so did you sort of look into what other people were doing at the time and then kind of decide actually there's a slightly better way, or did you just sort of start, rather than looking into other options, just sort of think, right, well, let's go do this ourselves?
Yeah, so look, I explored the option of going down the academic route, and often with that it takes a fair bit of time, and there's lots of barriers. We sort of came up with a bit of a compromise, really, where we partnered with an academic from Murdoch University, an organisational psychologist who had a PhD and specialising in this sort of area.
Yeah.
And really just embarking on our own research. So it's a little bit of art and science, if you like, where we wanted to get enough academic credibility, but also it needed to pass the pub test in terms of it actually being relevant to the organisations and people using it. So what became increasingly obvious over time is that although safety climate surveys have been around for a long time, as you might appreciate, safety is only one component of how an organisation performs.
Yeah.
And increasingly with HR professionals and employee engagement becoming such a big part of workplace health and safety, and workplace health and safety meaning a lot of mental health and psychosocial components, rather than coming up with an engagement survey, a psychosocial or mental health survey, a safety survey, it made complete sense from an efficiency point of view, but also from a measurement point of view, is understanding how those different components interact and the interdependencies between those. All are related, whether you like it or not, and the research supports that. So, rather than having 3 or 4 different surveys periodically, why not come up with an integrated model that tries to measure all of them?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, we've started sort of talking about what exactly it is. How would you describe what the Health and Safety Index is, and how does it work?
Yeah, look, in simple terms, it's a diagnostic survey that enables organisations to better understand focus areas, to focus on what matters. And when I say focus areas, both good and bad, often it's organisations are really quick to focus on what's not working.
Yeah.
Versus, sometimes you can leverage what's working really well to improve areas that need a little bit more attention to improve.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, a diagnostic survey helps focus on what's important, and then informs really the right strategic choices.
Okay.
So I was listening to one of your podcasts you did recently with Stuart from Risk Talk, and he spoke a bit about data and how important data is to inform choices. And the quality of data is just as important than anything, right? So, really focusing on stuff that's reliable and relevant is so important. Otherwise, it's just a whole bunch of information that really isn't providing a lot of value.
Yeah, and can lead to sort of massive overload, can't it? You could give people all the information in the world, but if they don't really know what to do with it, then there's not as much value in that.
Exactly. And that's why we set about going about doing this in the right way. So we spent a lot of time designing and getting it right. I mean, anyone can create a survey, but to do it in a way that's actually reliable and relevant enables organisations to benchmark not only internally but externally on how you're actually comparing over time or comparing against other organisations and industries can be super powerful.
Yeah, yeah. I before I worked in safety, I was in like business consulting, and we did a lot of primary research. So that would be typically that would be having telephone or conversations or face-to-face conversations with people and asking them lots of different questions, and it was all around what's going on in the marketplace and what's going on in their business and so on and so forth. And it is amazing how just there is that sort of science of how to ask the right sorts of questions to get the right sorts of information, because you can easily ask a lot of questions that don't really provide any value, I guess.
Exactly. You want to be able to ask the right questions that you're getting a relatively consistent answer. So then when you're aggregating into different areas, so if you're talking around health, well-being, or you're talking around leadership, or you're talking about levers to improve, the questions you're asking are collectively being answered in a similar way and consistently over a period of time.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of art to it, but regardless, we're excited about what we're doing, and we're continuing to work with organisations both not only in Australia, but we've got partners who other health and safety consulting businesses are using our health and safety index in other parts of the world, including the UK, Europe, and North America. More recently, we did some work with a bank in the UK,
right,
for them to better understand and delve a bit deeper on some of their mental health challenges in their organisation too.
Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned the kind of safety culture type survey. What would be the key kind of differentiators between that approach and what you guys are doing with the Health and Safety Index?
Look, we've got the one climate survey that is integrated, that looks at not only leadership and engagement, those organisational factors. And when I say leadership, I'm talking about individual leadership behaviours, but
Right.
also systems from a user experience perspective, and also health and wellbeing. So I guess looking at those four aspects in an integrated way is super important. I mean, I spoke about the importance of having things that are statistically reliable and relevant. And I guess the third component, which we find really useful too when we're talking to organisations, is we've developed levers for action. So
Yeah.
it's one thing to say, okay, well, this is what's working, this is not what's not working really well, but what do we actually do?
Yeah.
Through a whole bunch of correlations of information, we'll be able to group answers in a way that steer people in the direction of where to focus their attention to get the best return on investment.
Yeah.
And that could be more effective communication. It could be holding people or organizations accountable better. It could be recognition and praise. It could be setting the right values and beliefs, depending on the nature of the results and the patterns of the answers. We've been able to group some of these answers in a way that sort of point people in the right direction to focus.
Yeah.
It was really interesting, actually. I was out facilitating a workshop with an organisation recently, and one of the recurring themes from the audience was senior leaders don't get it. Often there's a mismatch between what senior leaders think and what the frontline workers are doing. And part of the feedback, and this was just very informal feedback from a small group of people in a classroom, was they're not communicating, they're not visible, things are not being actioned in a timely manner. And then when I look back at a lot of our benchmark data around leadership, the two things that are absolute standout around effective leadership is being visible, communicating well and setting clear expectations, holding people accountable and following through on getting stuff done.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it might sound very intuitive or obvious, but we're seeing that on the front line, but we're also seeing it through a whole bunch of data too. So the challenge, of course, is understanding pockets within your organisation where to focus, and how to use that information in an effective way we can actually add value to.
Yeah. I'd love to come back to that leadership point, because that was something you sent me a kind of summary document which I had to look through, and that was one of the things that I picked out. But just building upon the point there about the kind of levers for action, I think that's really, really valuable. If I give an analogy to my world, there are companies that go in and will do like a slip test and a slip risk assessment for clients, and they'll basically show them all of their problems, and then it's kind of like, all right, see ya. And it's kind of like, to some extent, there's the opportunity for clients to improve if you show them the problems that maybe they didn't know that they had, but probably if they knew how to improve in those areas, then they would have done it already, if you know what I mean. So I think having some steps to help them and some frameworks and stuff is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? Trying to understand how to improve and enable your workforce to improve the organizational factors and the controls that are actually going to make a big difference. I mean, I've read a lot of information from a retired professor now here in Australia called Andrew Hopkins, and he talks about some of the fundamental building blocks of having a really strong safety management performance in your organization is to having really strong controls in the field, so operational controls, but also have organizational factors and a culture that's strong too. So, you might be able to have really strong, effective, critical controls on the front line, but if the culture is not supporting that and all the organizational factors, they're not sustainable.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So I think one of the things that a really effective climate survey does is really hone in on all those organizational factors to improve. It's certainly not the only metric, but having a nice balanced scorecard including understanding your organisational factors, can make a big difference to improve. As you say, focusing on not only what's not working or not working so well, but then understanding how to fix it. So then that flows into your strategy.
Yeah. Nice. And what sort of is the output then that people get? So if they did the survey, do they get like a report and then a sort of scorecard? How does that kind of look? And then how does that feed into the sort of areas for improvement and any help that they get for that?
Yeah. So I guess along with the various parameters in that we've designed the survey, one thing that we've done to make it really specific is, as part of every survey, we collect the demographic data specific to the organisation,
Right.
be that the locations, the business units, the positions. So then when we're comparing information against various dimensions or aspects, which we use the term, we can then relay that specific to their organisation. So you can quite quickly tell if there's some mental health challenges in a certain age group, of a certain gender, of a certain either a shift work or contractors that's specific to your organisation. So we then produce a report which is broken down into various aspects and dimensions across those demographics, along with some levers for action.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Let's go back to that leadership point then. So if you've identified some of the gaps there. So if you were sitting down with a CEO, what questions in the index or what sort of insights from the index would you show them to kind of maybe challenge some of their assumptions and get them to focus on improving in those areas that the data highlights?
Yeah, so I guess as it relates to leadership, some of the questions specifically relate to leadership behaviours and their ability to be visible or having effective safety conversations. Some of the questions relate more specifically to observations of other individuals, regardless of their seniority, in terms of them walking past undesired behaviours or taking shortcuts or things like this that might indicate that the leadership of individuals is not effective as what it could be.
Yeah.
Along with I guess, feedback on some of the closed questions that we have, which is aggregated using a Likert scale and aggregated to various levels of the organisation and collectively into one overarching number. We then rate all of the metrics from low through to high performance, with the goal of really most organisations are trying to get to high performance regardless of their level of maturity or where they want to play. So what that means then is that organisations can quite quickly understand what's low performing, what's high performing, and where they want to focus their attention. So along with those closed questions, we also ask some open questions. We use the simple analogy or questions around what organisations should keep doing, stop doing, or start doing.
Yeah.
And inevitably, the data lines up with the verbatim feedback we get from organisations. And sometimes, depending on the organisation, you'll get people who are disputing the numbers. And then when you get to the back of the report and you're saying, well, this is what your organisation's saying, verbatim, inevitably what they're saying in words lines up with what the numbers say too.
Yeah. And I'm sure that helps to convince them, right? So in your experience then, Mark, is it well, I'll give you my experience and then I'll be interested to see what yours is. So in my experience, senior leadership teams believe in safety and want their teams and their contractors and their customers to be safe. But I think where they fall down a bit is that they don't sort of almost follow it through by keeping that pressure. I know it's the wrong word, but putting the pressure or the impetus on the middle management. And I see the gap often is in that lack of um, structure or focus or whatever it is being placed into that middle, and then it's the sort of sticky middle where things start to fall apart. And then when you get that feedback that you guys provide from the shop floor up, there's often a huge amount of shock and surprise because they feel as if, oh, we believe in safety, we're good at safety, we want people to be safe, and we're not really sure why it's not happening.
Look, I would say that sometimes that's the case. Sometimes the challenge is within middle management or
Yeah.
frontline supervisors, but not always.
Hmm.
Not always. What I would say, some of the trends that we see that is almost always the same is that most people go to work and generally have some really strong scores around care and concern or around wanting to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But knowing what is right and what is wrong, and then actually following through, stuff gets in the way.
Yeah.
So you've alluded to one component of a barrier being middle management for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But
And I wouldn't
sometimes
blame the middle management. I think that is a problem from the board, but I think that's where it gets stuck sometimes.
yeah, look, it can. Look, sometimes we see within ours in the workforce is amazing.
Hmm.
So the barrier, if you like, or the tension point doesn't always have to be middle management.
Hmm.
Sometimes it could be commercial pressures, and we start to see that through some results around performance versus safety.
Yeah.
Sorry, productivity versus safety,
Productive.
where
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
putting more emphasis on productivity. Sometimes it's got to do with work demands or time pressures, which doesn't always have to be because people have got too much work. It's because there's other organizational factors like turnover or really poor systems or manual systems that really make it clunky. And
Yeah.
what should be a really simple workload actually becomes quite burdensome because of these other factors. So
Yeah.
trying to sort of pinpoint exactly what the contributing factors are can be a bit challenging, but a really good example is if there's time pressures for whatever reason or work demands for whatever reason. Sometimes we see that play out around people taking shortcuts.
Yeah.
Sometimes we then see that play out around the impact on individuals' mental health or fatigue. So there's an interplay between all these factors that sometimes we can really start to unpack and unpick what the reasons are, or at least the contributing factors that enable us to then work with organisations to focus on where to focus.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Would you say, Mark, that there's I don't know if assumption is the right word because I think there is some data to support this, right? But um, the organizations that do best commercially, make the most profit, are the most successful. Um, it doesn't often tend to be the case that they're really bad at safety. The organizations that are succeeding tend to be the ones that are a bit better at safety. Would you agree with that based on the data that you've seen?
Well, look, I think if you were to generalise, having more time and resources enables you to focus your attention on having really robust controls.
Hmm.
So yes, that would make sense. It's not always the case, but yeah,
No.
I've personally worked within organisations that are very well resourced
Hmm.
and with amazing safety cultures, and the combination of the two ends up being, an amazing workplace to work for.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than going to a construction site when it's commercially it's going pear-shaped,
Yeah.
and there's pressures on budgets, and the P&L is going the wrong way, and the cash flow is going the wrong way. And inevitably, there's going to be, pressure in the system. So, yeah,
Mm.
it makes complete sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Next thing I was going to ask you about was shift workers and burnout. So we did a podcast recently about sort of managing fatigue. So in the index from what you shared with me, shift workers often score lower, particularly around health and well-being, cognitive load, and fatigue. So what would you say is driving that?
Yeah, so I think that the three standouts that are always almost consistent is the mismatch between senior leaders and frontline, the perception at least,
Hmm.
rightly or wrongly. Um, Shift workers and their performance, and the third is contractors as well, which
Hmm.
we can talk about later if we've got time. But
Hmm.
in terms of the shift workers, as you might appreciate, well documented that your circadian rhythms are just all over the place, while ever your sleep patterns are not consistent, or if you're doing night shift, right?
Yeah.
So that plays out in fatigue. Fatigue plays out in safety. It plays out in your mental health. I mean, that's almost obvious,
Yeah.
but it plays out within the information that we're seeing as well. Doesn't necessarily mean that all shift work's bad, particularly if you've got the right controls in place to manage that. But what we are seeing, in addition to that, around impacts on fatigue and mental health, are things like accountability and taking shortcuts.
Hmm.
Often the level of supervision when you're working night shifts is not the same.
Yeah.
So if the organisation doesn't have high levels of integrity and/or accountability, and no one's watching, and there's all those other pressures at play, often people take shortcuts.
Hmm.
That's just human nature. So we do see some of those trends sometimes.
Yeah.
The other thing we're seeing a fair bit around shift workers is things like the perception, at least, around them having high levels of bullying and criticism.
Right.
Why that's the case, I don't know. Um, Across the board, I mean, it's going to vary from organisation to organisation, but I think whether it's the nature of the workforce, or whether it's the nature of not having the same level of supervision, or just the general culture of not being held accountable, bullying and criticism tends to be a little bit higher in shift workers as well.
Right.
Yeah, so there's a few different trends that sort of play out, but they're the main ones.
Okay. And you mentioned the piece around contractors. So if I read this correctly, they often have kind of better overall scores, but worse behaviors in certain areas. So can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, so we're generalizing here.
Yeah, cool.
We're
Of course. Yeah.
generalizing,
Yeah.
and every organization is different.
Yeah.
But if I
Of
was to
course.
generalize that, your overall score of contractors is better. And I spoke about the various aspects of contractors, various aspects of the health and safety index. One of the things that is absolutely light and day compared to the direct employer workforce's systems.
Hmm.
Often, as a contractor, you've got to jump through hoops before you even start. So the level of the performance around systems on contractors are generally a little bit higher.
Yeah.
But where they're consistently performing a lot lower compared to the direct workforce are things around taking shortcuts and time pressures.
Right. Yeah.
So if you think about how the commercial model plays out generally with contractors, they're paid a sum of money, and they're incentivized to either hit that milestone within a certain period of time, whether there's time pressures, or it's a self and time pressure,
Yeah.
because it's a lump sum payment.
Yeah.
Or inevitably, as a contractor, you're basically paid to zip in and zip out.
Hmm.
You're not there for a long period of time, so the time pressures, the incentive to take shortcuts is just a little bit higher.
Yeah.
So, despite the overall performance often being higher in certain areas, consistently, we're seeing their ability to compromise safety, take shortcuts, and feeling under pressure around time is often much, much higher.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, as somebody who runs a business that does kind of contracting, you're spot on that the commerciality of it is, you've got a fixed fee and you've allocated a certain amount of resource to achieving that job in that particular time frame for that level of cost, and you want to hit that, right? Because otherwise your business model kind of falls down. So that does make perfect sense.
Yeah. And look, that doesn't necessarily mean you need to change the commercial model all the time.
No.
But it might mean that you acknowledge that for what it is, and then that you work within the parameters to be able to at least be aware of some of those challenges, so you can sort of do the best you can within the parameters that you dealt.
Yeah, exactly. And that was going to be my next question, really, was in those two areas of shift workers and contractors, and it's two different answers. What are some of the things that you've seen people do as a result of doing the survey, getting their index scores, etc., that have made a positive impact? So if we start with the contractors piece, how, how would you advise people, or what have you seen people do that's been successful in working better with their contractors after they've done the survey?
Yeah. So if we just focus on contractors for a
Yeah,
and we think about, if time is an issue, um, and compromising safety is an issue, um, it's around sort of setting those expectations up really early in the contract, as early as possible, around, again, depending on the stakeholder. So if you're the primary contractor, you're the asset owner or the principal,
yeah,
um, it's around being really clear on expectations, but also acknowledging that um, they're not going to be holding the contractor accountable from a commercial point of view, around certain things not being done, because I think, whether you like it or not, there's this subconscious thinking around, if it's not done on time, um, liquidated damages are going to come in, and we're going to lose money. And so
mm,
having some flexibility within the parameters around variations for whatever reason, where safety is going to be impacted,
yeah,
is really important. So
hmm,
much of it's a commercial discussion, as it is around a safety discussion, around
yeah,
having a little bit of flexibility
yeah,
around variations. Um, and as it relates to um, shift workers, again, it depends on the organisation. There's so many variables, but um, having a level of visibility, of really clear communication, because whether you like it or not, you just can't have the same level of human presence in a night shift that you would.
no,
Um, so having a really effective communication strategy, where things are being communicated in a really clear and effective way for shift workers, and
yeah,
almost treating them the same, so they feel like they're the same as the rest of the workforce, is really, really important.
yeah,
Um, and again, having really strong values and beliefs, so people are acting and behaving and making decisions in a way that they would, regardless if someone's watching or not.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we have in our team night shift people, and a couple of things that we've done that have been really beneficial, particularly thinking about stress and burnout and mental health, is we changed to sort of 4 on, 3 off, to just to reduce that sort of amount of time doing nights, and give a bit more ability to have a more of a normal weekend. And then, as you just said, actually the values piece, when we got everyone together and we kind of agreed, right, as a team, including those guys, what are our values, and what are the things we're going to live by. I feel that was a really positive change that we made, and including them was critical in that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, that all sounds quite effective in terms of your approach you've taken. But again, I mean, there's so many different variables depending
Yeah,
on the organisation, the industry, and
yeah,
the
exactly.
type of work. But
Yeah,
yeah, again, I guess what it does reinforce is that, um, as part of doing some sort of climate survey or diagnostic, you know, a bit like a doctor, really. It's really hard to prescribe a solution or jump to solution mode until, unless you've got a really clear diagnosis. So
Yeah.
spending a bit of time up front to really understand what some of the challenges are, and what's working well, can make a huge difference in terms of informing the right choices and the right strategy.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So we've spoken about the kind of big three themes that you outlined. What's been though? My sense is that you sort of knew that those three were going to be important before you started. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what would be the sort of most surprising thing that you found, having now done this for several years? What is it that the data and the insights are showing you that perhaps you were shocked by or surprised by, either positively or negatively?
So look, every time we do a report or a diagnostic, it's always different. So, I actually get a bit excited. I know that sounds a bit geeky, but I get excited around each report because it really shows up something just a little bit different. But if I look at the benchmark generally, what we are seeing some trends, if you like, that has shifted. And if I look back, it's not a surprise, but I guess it's worth recognizing, is that some of the performance around mental health has improved,
Yeah.
particularly around some of the workforce feedback around feeling comfortable talking around mental health. And I
Hmm.
think that's probably a combination of the industry shifting and the amount of focus. There's been a big regulatory shift in Australia, at least. I think as a community, we're way more knowledgeable and aware, both inside and outside of the workplace, around the importance of mental health. So I think um, workers' ability, and willingness to talk around these sorts of things is definitely improving.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're seeing is not improving is probably, at least in the last 18 months, couple of years, has started to deteriorate, is the usability of systems.
Right.
And I don't know if that's
Mm.
just because organisation systems are getting worse, or the perception or the expectation from the end user is getting higher. So, the intuition around using a mobile device or an iPhone, you don't need a user manual to use it. You can pick it up and
Yeah.
off you go. So I think the expectation around the user around using organizational systems is becoming increasingly high. So for an organization to keep up with technology and invest in the great user experience is challenging.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
challenging,
Yeah.
particularly, as if you think about the historical way to manage safety is through process,
Yeah.
um, or procedures. As we progress as a human race in and outside of the workplace, we're becoming less and less reliant on written forms of instruction, and it's more based on intuition, based on technology, and the
Yeah.
technology guiding you down a path. So I think for an organisation to stay up to speed with expectations of the end user around the workforce, it's hard.
Mm.
So, if that's coupled with more regulation, or people throwing more processes or procedures or more regulation at things, and cluttering up the way organizations operate, inevitably it's not going to be a great experience for the end user.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see how these kind of big mega trends are sort of piling on more and more to people's to-do lists as well. And so if their perception of the systems is not keeping up with that, that is going to load on more pressure and mental health challenges and stress and all that, isn't it? So that probably is something that organizations should be really thinking carefully about, because you can quite easily see, if we carry on in this direction, that's going to become a big blockage and a big problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I spoke about the improvements in the data we're seeing around people's willingness or ability to talk around mental health. What's not improving around mental health is the cognitive demand and burnout.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, we're in the information age where there is so much information at your fingertips, and it's just coming faster and faster. So it's not surprising that people are feeling cognitive demand and cognitive tasks, and burnout is getting more and more challenging because the speed of information is not slowing down either. So it's some of these things might sound pretty obvious, but at the same time, as they play out from end user, or how that plays out in terms of informing the right strategy, can be really, really important.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's like the data, isn't it? It's not the data that's valuable, it's the insights. And I think some of these trends and stuff, people could recognize them, but maybe it's just having those light bulb moments of conversations like this. So actually, yeah, I can see how, I understand all this stuff's going on, but I hadn't realized that actually that could impact me because of X, Y, and Z. Therefore, we can start to do something proactively about it. And that's why we're trying to have these sorts of conversations, right?
Oh, totally. And if organisations are reaching out to their workforce and listening, that's a great
Good
start.
start. Yeah.
If you're actively listening and then doing something about that in a timely manner, great, even better. But then if your strategy then are not a blanket generic approach across the whole organisation, you start to be a little bit more targeted around specific demographics around either shift workers or genders or age or different business units, and you're tailoring your strategy and tailoring your resources to be a little bit more targeted, that can have a much, much better impact.
Yeah, definitely. Great. So let's start bringing this to a close then. So if somebody's listening to us and joining us today and they're thinking, well, we're probably okay, but I'm not sure what I'm missing, what would you suggest they do as a first step?
Yeah, so look, ultimately it comes back to your strategy, right? So, if your strategy is informing you around your workforce needing some improvement, or you needing feedback from your workforce, well, having some sort of climate survey and ability to get feedback through other means is really, really important. But certainly, I think regardless of the method of getting feedback is absolutely critical in terms of focus on how to improve.
Yeah. And if people wanted to learn a bit more about the index and how to get a survey, what would be the best way of getting in touch?
Yeah, look, there's probably two key reasons. So they can contact myself, Mark Wright, on LinkedIn. I'm sure there's lots of Mark Wrights. I think there may have been even a ex-Liverpool player from England called Mark Wright.
Yeah.
But regardless, also jump on our website, healthandsafetyindex.com.au, and there's a whole bunch of information in there around what the Health and Safety Index covers. There's some research article, there's some free resources, our pricing on there as well. So, feel free to jump on there, have a bit of a look around, and yeah, more than happy to try and have a conversation, help people out where they can.
Good stuff. And we've been talking a lot about the kind of aggregated benchmark findings. Is there a way of seeing that on the website or somewhere else people could kind of get a sense of the overall findings, kind of accumulating all of these surveys over the years?
Yeah, so we periodically will put on blogs around some of our health and safety index results. So yeah, if you jump on our blog, you'll see a whole bunch of information there and data. We've got a YouTube channel. We're often doing webinars ourselves and taking little snippets of some of our webinars. So jump on our YouTube channel too. There's information there and little small snippets of videos and information and free resources there too.
Good stuff. Well, thanks so much, Mark. I really enjoyed that conversation and lots to dig into. So yeah, appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Christian.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.